Hello, and welcome to the Independent Custody Visiting Association's Bitesize training on equalities and bias. I'm Stacey Evans and I'm the Interim Chief Operating Officer. If you're viewing this video via YouTube and you'd like to view captions, please click on the small CC button on the bottom right hand side of your screen. There are some short exercises and a quiz during this video, so you may want to get a pen and paper ready. And finally, there's some further reading to accompany this video which your scheme manager will be able to share with you. We hope you enjoy the training. So firstly, we're going to take a look at our objectives for the session. Number 1, to explore the history of custody visiting and reiterate the importance of equality. Number 2, to examine what equalities means in the context of custody visiting. And number 3, to examine what unconscious bias is, how it can affect our work and how to mitigate against it. So first of all, we're going to look at the history of independent custody visiting and equality. And this is the same information you would have read in your pre-read induction manual, but it's important for us to reiterate that the whole reason custody visiting came into effect was as an equalities response. So I'm just going to talk you through a brief history behind it. Civil disorders, 1981. In 1981, several outbreaks of unrest occurred in major cities: Bristol, Liverpool, Manchester, the West Midlands and London. But the most significant of these disorders took place in Brixton between the 10th and 12th of April, when hundreds of young people attacked property and the police. The cause of these disorders centred around people protesting about oppressive policing, and in particular the alleged harassment of people, especially young black people, by the police. And in short, these incidents were anti-police and voiced a lack of trust in the law and order authorities. After days of unrest, these serious incidents led to the government ordering an urgent inquiry and appointing Lord Scarman to conduct a comprehensive investigation into the events. So the resulting investigation, the Scarman report, included several recommendations about reforming the law, community relations and policing practices to help tackle the central problems which caused the civil disorders. The report advocated a system for members of the public from local communities to inspect the way police detained people in their custody. And originally referred to as lay visiting, independent custody visiting is the system that has been developed to meet this recommendation. And although independent custody visiting was introduced in the 80s, it's only been a statutory requirement since 2002. And in 2012, the responsibility for organising and overseeing the delivery of independent custody visiting was placed with the Police and Crime Commissioners, and this remains one of their very few statutory obligations. You may have noticed a little book icon on the last two slides. This means there's links to further reading if you are interested. In this case, there's a link to further reading about the Brixton riots and Scarman report, and there's a link to a podcast about the Brixton riots on our further reading document. So now we've had a look at the history of custody visiting, we're going to move on to our first exercise. Now you may choose to do this one in your head, out loud, or you can grab a pen and paper. It's up to you. But you don't need to write these questions down because I'm going to leave this slide up. So number 1, what is equality? Number 2, how does equality and bias impact on your work as an ICV? And number 3, what are the challenges around equality and bias when custody visiting? Now you can press pause and have a think about those questions, and when you've had a couple of minutes to think about them and are ready to go again, you can just press play on the video. Welcome back. I hope you've had a chance to think about those questions. So firstly then, what is equality? Well, the definition of equality is about ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents, and believing that no one should have poorer life chances because of where, what or whom they were born, what they believe, or whether they have a disability. Equality work recognises that historically certain groups of people with particular characteristics, for example race, disability, sex and sexuality, have experienced discrimination. Number 2. How does equality and bias impact on your work as an ICV? So you need to look for evidence of inequity in your visits. You'd want to make sure that all detainees were getting access to the same rights and entitlements in similar timeframes and with a similar level of care regardless of their gender, race or ethnic group, for example. It's important for you to recognise your own biases and acknowledge that everyone has them. And when there is a bias, make sure to do things to challenge it. Do some research, engage with a group of people, for example. And we are going to talk about triggers and solutions later on. So in summary, it's important to promote equality, recognise and remove bias when visiting. Number 3, what are the challenges around equality and bias when custody visiting? Well, detainees come from all areas of the community and they each have their own particular needs and vulnerabilities. Some are obvious, others less so. It might be difficult to compare treatment for different detainees on your visit because you might not see all detainees or enough of their custody record to be able to make a comparison. And sometimes inequality of treatment can be really hard to spot. It's not always straightforward and it can be smaller things, such as making some detainees wait longer than other detainees, for example, for a drink or food. And it could be not calling for an appropriate adult for certain groups when the detainee from that group is vulnerable. That sort of thing. So the best thing for you to do is to keep your eyes and ears open and understand what inequity could look like in order to spot it if it happens. So now I'm going to talk to you about equality in a bit more detail and give you the overarching principle and law on equalities. So the Equality Act 2010 legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in wider society. The Act prohibits all employers, service providers and providers of education from discriminating against, harassing or victimising individuals with protected characteristics. Unlawful discrimination includes failing to provide accessible facilities for people with disabilities or treating people unfavourably because of their race. And custody staff are essentially service providers to detainees and therefore covered under this part of the Act. If you'd like to read more on the Act, there is a link on the further reading document, but please be aware this slide and the Act applies to Scotland, England and Wales only. So now we're going to move on to the public sector equality duty. And this came into force in 2011 and was created under the Equality Act 2010. So the public sector equality duty is a duty on public authorities to consider or think about how their policies or decisions affect people who are protected under the Equality Act. It also requires public bodies to have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations between different people when carrying out their activities. And this is something that all public bodies or services should be doing, particularly when carrying out day-to-day work, shaping policy, delivering services, and even in relation to their own employees. And custody visiting is included in this. It's a positive and proactive duty which you should complete when carrying out your role. Protected characteristics. So under the Equality Act 2010, it's against the law to discriminate against someone because of a protected characteristic. So what are they? There are 9 protected characteristics and they include age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. And I want you to think about how many people you see in custody that will fall under one or possibly more than one of those categories. And what does this mean? Well, it means that an individualised approach is required with due regard to the protected characteristics by everyone who comes into contact with that person. So each person should be treated as an individual and custody should seek to meet their individual needs. So now we've had a look at the Equality Act 2010, the public sector equality duty and protected characteristics. We're moving on to an exercise. And again, it's up to you how you choose to do this one. I'm going to leave this slide up so you don't need to write the characteristics down. And I want you to think about how custody could impact differently on the protected characteristics. So how might each group be affected by the custody environment? And I want you to try and think about accessibility and vulnerability of various groups. So the 9 protected characteristics again. Number 1, age. 2, disability. 3, gender reassignment. 4, marriage and civil partnership. 5, pregnancy and maternity. 6, race. 7, religion or belief. 8, sex. And 9, sexual orientation. And once again, you can just press pause on the video. When you're ready to go again, press play. Welcome back. Hope you've had a chance to think about those. So we're going to look at some examples now, and you may be aware of some of these already from your visits to custody. So what should you look for then? And some examples include, for age, physical health needs such as walking aids. Is the detainee able to get up and down from bed? If the detainee is a child, is custody risk assessing and treating that child as a priority and vulnerable? Disability. Is the detainee able to use the facilities? Have reasonable adjustments been made where possible? If there's a mental health or learning difficulty, has an appropriate adult been requested? Gender reassignment. Has the detainee been referred to as the gender they refer to themselves as? If they were searched, was the search completed by someone of the same gender as they self-identify? And some more examples then. Pregnancy and maternity. If a breastfeeding mother, has a breast pump been provided for expressing? Are any dependent children being looked after outside of custody? Religion or belief. Has the detainee been given any religious items they may need? Are they stored correctly? Sex. If the detainee is female, have they been offered sanitary protection, and was this of the appropriate type that they needed? So well done if you've got some of those examples written down. These lists are of course not exhaustive, so well done if you've thought of additional examples that ICB should check for as well. General equalities ethos for ICBs. People in police custody are vulnerable as they are reliant on others for their care and some basic needs. Detainees have the right to be treated fairly and with respect regardless of their background and life experiences. If something feels wrong, report it. If work should be praised, report it. And as a reminder, you're in custody as members of the public. You don't need to become too embroiled in equality legislation and protected characteristics. Just continue to report anything that feels wrong and praise any good work or efforts you notice as you do now. So as we come to the end of your equalities part of the training, we're going to have a short quiz to assist your learning. Again, it's up to you how you do this, but I am going to leave the questions up on the slide. So number 1, what report was written after the Brixton riots? Number 2, what did the report recommend? Number 3, give us a definition of equalities. And number 4, name 4 of the 9 protected characteristics. Again, you can just press pause, and when you're ready to go again, press play. So now we're going to go through the answers to the quiz. Number 1, what report was written after the Brixton riots? And it was, of course, the Scarman report, so give yourself a point if you've got that one right. Number 2, what did the report recommend? And it recommended a system for members of the public from local communities to inspect the way police detained people in their custody. So if you had that or something similar, give yourself another point. Number 3, give a definition of equality. So equality is about ensuring that every individual has an equal opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents, and believing that no one should have poorer life chances because of where, what or whom they were born, what they believe or whether they have a disability. And equality work recognises that historically, certain groups of people with particular characteristics, for example, race, disability, sex and sexuality, have experienced discrimination. Again, give yourself a point if you had that or something similar. And then finally, name 4 of the 9 protected characteristics. So you could have had age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. So there was 4 points up for grabs there. Well done if you had all those right. And that brings us to the end of our equalities training. We're about to move on to unconscious bias, so if you need a short break, please just press pause and come back when you're ready. So now we're going to look at unconscious bias, understand what it is and how to think about the biases you might have. So what is unconscious bias? We all have biases. Becoming aware will help to mitigate them. And this term is used to describe bias or prejudice that we are not aware of. Research shows that our brains jump to assumptions and conclusions without us even knowing it. And personal attitudes and beliefs are shaped by the way we've been brought up and how we perceive other people. And it's important to remember that bias is a sensitive area for most people, as it can be uncomfortable for us to admit that we have them. So let's take a look at the two types of unconscious bias. Number 1, affinity bias. This is where we show a preference for those who appear similar to ourselves and our families. It leads us to favour people who we feel we have a connection or similarity to. And you can see there a picture of a dog and its owner, and that's just a light point to show you how people prefer those who look similar to themselves. And confirmation bias. We find what we're looking for, the tendency to search for, favour and recall information that confirms one's previously held beliefs. And this effect is stronger for emotionally charged issues and for deeply entrenched beliefs. And how to avoid confirmation bias? You need to acknowledge that you have it and look for ways to challenge it. Seek out information from a range of sources and use an approach to consider situations from multiple perspectives, not just your own. Alternatively, you can discuss your thoughts with others. Surround yourself with a diverse group of people and don't be afraid to listen to different views. So now we're going to move on to a short exercise. I'm going to read you out a statement and I want you to have a think about how you would explain it. So, a young boy is being driven by his father when the car crashed. They were both taken to hospital and the surgeon on call said, "I can't deal with this person, he's my son." So how would you explain this? And the answer is that the surgeon is the boy's mother. Now usually here we get answers such as the surgeon is the boy's stepdad, it's a blended family for example, among other answers to explain why the surgeon is male, not female. And this is a common bias starting in childhood, that people identify a particular gender with a job or role. And examples include identifying doctors as men and nurses as women. So now I'm going to do a quick fire round, calling out some roles, and I want you to think about whether a particular gender comes to mind first. So, firefighter, secretary, police officer, cleaner. The halo and horns effect. The halo effect is the concept by which a person who is judged positively on one aspect is automatically judged positively on several other aspects without much evidence. And the horns effect is the concept by which a person who is judged negatively on one aspect is automatically judged negatively on several other aspects without much evidence. And we tend to pay less attention to a person's negative traits after discerning one or two positive traits in the first few minutes of meeting them. So earlier, I told you briefly how to avoid confirmation bias, but now I'm going to go through some particular triggers and solutions to help you. And I'm also going to include a copy of this table in the further reading document for you to refer back to. So, bias trigger, denial, the solution, self-knowledge, be aware of your biases and do not suppress them. Worry, relax. When you stress about your biases, they are more likely to slip out or cause you to avoid people. Rush in. Take time to make decisions about people. Biases are most active when we are rushing, stressed, tired, frustrated or angry. Subjectivity. Follow fair policies and procedures with safeguards to prevent bias. Challenge yourself to check evidence for and against decisions, acknowledging that your conditioning is imbalanced. Seek diverse perspectives, for example on a decision-making panel or from your ICB partner. Media influence. Seek stereotype-defying examples. Broaden your positive, alternative media and culture input to balance out the negative. And if there's a lack of experience or connections, learn about cultures, communities and identities apart from your own via networking, training, books, documentaries, films, community events, festivals. Visit local support groups. Shadow, travel and listen to the experience of others. So let's have a recap of what we've looked at in this session. Number 1, we've explored the history of custody visiting and reiterated the importance of equality. Number 2, we've examined what equalities means in the context of custody visiting. Number 3, and finally we've examined what unconscious bias is, how it can affect our work and how to mitigate against it. And that brings us to the end of our equalities and bias training. I hope you've enjoyed this session. And if you don't already have it, please ask your scheme manager for a copy of our further reading document that I've referred to throughout this video. I've also included links to our other straight to ICV bite-sized resources for you to watch at your convenience. Thanks for watching, take care, and we'll see you all soon.